Some places are designed to heal the broken mind. But what happens when those places become prisons for something far darker than illness? Tonight, we're diving into 3 asylum stories that were deliberately buried, scrubbed from official records, and left to rot in the forgotten corners of history. These aren't legends. These aren't folklore. These are documented incidents that someone desperately wanted the world to forget. Before we begin, I need to warn you. What you're about to hear comes from sealed medical records, leaked documents, and the testimonies of people who can never speak about these events publicly. The names have been changed, the locations obscured, but the horror, that remains untouched. In 1952, Blackwater Asylum in rural Vermont was considered a model institution. Modern for its time, it housed 340 patients and employed the latest treatments in psychiatric care. But in the winter of that year, something changed, something that would lead to the facility's sudden closure just 6 months later. It started with patient 127, a woman named Catherine, who'd been admitted for severe depression following the loss of her child. The nurses noted something peculiar in her file during the first week of December. Every night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., Catherine would sit bolt upright in bed and begin to sing. Not just any song, but a lullaby that no one on staff recognized, in a language that linguistics experts later couldn't identify. Within 3 days, her roommate joined in, then the patient in the adjacent room, then the entire women's ward. 47 women, all singing the same impossible lullaby at exactly 2:47 a.m. The nurses tried everything. Sedatives had no effect. Isolation only made it worse. When they separated the women, they would each sing in perfect harmony, despite being in different wings of the building, some separated by 3 floors. Dr. Harrison Webb, the head psychiatrist, was baffled. He began recording the sessions, documenting every detail. In his notes, which were only declassified in 2019, he wrote, "The melody is beautiful, almost hypnotic. Staff members have begun humming it during their shifts without realizing. I find myself unable to get it out of my head. More concerning, I've started hearing it in rooms where no one is singing." But here's where it gets truly terrifying. On December 19th, the maintenance staff reported finding something in the walls of the women's ward. During a routine pipe inspection, they discovered a hidden space between the walls, a gap about 3 feet wide that ran the entire length of the building. Inside this space, they found the remains of 17 children, all aged between 3 and 7 years old. Their bones were arranged in a perfect circle, and carved into the wall above them was musical notation for a lullaby. The asylum had been built in 1891, and these remains were dated to approximately 1895. But there were no records of any children dying at the facility. No missing person reports that matched. Nothing in the town's history to explain 17 dead children hidden in the walls of an asylum. After the discovery, the singing changed. It was no longer a lullaby. The women's voices became screams, perfectly harmonized screams that would begin at 2:47 a.m. and continue until sunrise. Staff members began quitting in droves. 3 nurses were hospitalized with complete nervous breakdowns. Dr. Webb himself had to be committed to a different facility after he was found trying to tear down the walls of his own office, claiming he could hear the children singing back. On January 3, 1953, the decision was made to evacuate all patients and close Blackwater Asylum permanently. But here's the part that will make your blood run cold. The evacuation was scheduled for January 5th. On the night of January 4th, at exactly 2:47 a.m., every single woman in that ward stopped breathing simultaneously. 47 women, all with different medical histories, different ages, different conditions, all died at the exact same moment. The official cause of death for all of them? Unexplained cardiac arrest. The building was demolished in 1954, and a park now stands where Blackwater Asylum once loomed. But locals refuse to visit after dark, because if you're there at exactly 2:47 a.m., you can still hear it. 47 voices singing a lullaby that was never meant for the living. Our second story takes us to St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital in Maine, 1967. This one centers around a single room, room 237 in the isolation ward, and a treatment method that was both revolutionary and catastrophic. Dr. Eleanor Price was a pioneer in confrontational therapy. She believed that patients needed to literally face themselves, to confront their own madness head-on. Her signature treatment involved mirrors, dozens of mirrors. She would place patients in a room completely lined with mirrors, ceiling to floor, and force them to spend hours staring at their own reflection. The theory was simple. By confronting every angle of themselves, patients would be forced to accept reality and could no longer hide from their delusions. In practice, it was psychological torture. But Dr. Price was convinced it worked, and the hospital administration gave her free rein to continue her experiments. Room 237 was her laboratory. She had it specially constructed with two-way mirrors, allowing her to observe while remaining hidden. The room was completely sealed, soundproofed, and climate-controlled. Once a patient was locked inside, they were surrounded by infinite reflections of themselves, unable to determine which mirror was real and which was an illusion. In May of 1967, a patient named Michael Reeves was admitted. He suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and claimed he could see the other version of himself, a shadow self that wanted to take his place. Dr. Price saw this as the perfect test case for her mirror treatment. Michael was placed in room 237 for what was supposed to be a 4-hour session. Dr. Price watched from her observation room as Michael initially panicked, then gradually calmed down, staring into the mirrors with intense focus. This was normal. What wasn't normal was what happened in hour 3. Michael began talking to his reflection, not in the way someone might talk to themselves, but having a full conversation with pauses as if listening to responses. Dr. Price noted this was likely him externalizing his internal dialogue. She decided to let the session continue. That decision would haunt her for the rest of her life. At the 4-hour mark, Dr. Price went to release Michael from the room. When she opened the door, Michael was standing in the center, facing one of the mirrors, with his back to her. She called his name. He didn't respond. She approached and put her hand on his shoulder, and when he turned around, she saw his face and screamed. Michael's eyes were completely white, no pupils, no iris, just white. His mouth was twisted into a smile that was physically too wide, stretching past where human lips should be able to reach. And when he spoke, Dr. Price swore his voice came from behind her, not from his mouth. He said only one sentence: "Thank you for opening the door. He's been waiting so long to leave." Then Michael collapsed.
When the medical team revived him, his eyes were normal, his face was normal. He had no memory of the session, no memory of the mirrors, nothing. But here's where it gets strange. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 different staff members approached hospital administration with an identical complaint. They had seen Michael Reeves in the hospital corridors, but when they checked his room, he was asleep in bed. The timestamps confirmed it. Michael was documented as being in his locked room at the exact times staff members saw him walking the halls. Security footage showed nothing unusual, but patients began reporting seeing the man from the mirror room standing outside their doors at night, always standing perfectly still, always smiling too wide, always disappearing when staff investigated. Dr. Price became obsessed with understanding what had happened. Against all protocols, she began spending nights in room 237 herself, staring into the mirrors, trying to replicate Michael's experience. On the night of June 12th, the night security guard heard screaming coming from the isolation ward. When he reached room 237, he found the door wide open and all the mirrors shattered from the inside. Dr. Eleanor Price was found in the corner of the room, catatonic. She never spoke another coherent word for the remaining 30 years of her life, but nurses reported that every night, at exactly the same time, she would smile that too wide smile and whisper, "He's free, he's free, he's free." Michael Reeves was released from St. Agnes in 1968, deemed successfully treated. He moved to a small town in Colorado and lived a quiet, unremarkable life until his death in 2003. But here's the final detail that will make you question everything. At Michael's funeral, the mortician reported something impossible. When preparing the body, he found a note sewn into the lining of his chest cavity. The note, written in Michael's own handwriting, said, "I've been dead since the mirrors. Whatever came out is not me. Please don't let it spread." The mortician burned the note and never spoke of it publicly. This information only came to light through his deathbed confession in 2019.
Our final story is the shortest, but perhaps the most disturbing. It comes from Northfield Psychiatric Institute in 1979, and it involves an experiment that lasted exactly 7 days before being permanently shut down and classified. Dr. James Foster had a radical theory that many psychiatric disorders were caused by sensory overload. He believed that the constant barrage of sound, light, and stimulation was fracturing the human mind. His solution? Complete sensory deprivation, but on a scale never attempted before. He designed the silence room, a chamber 15 feet by 15 feet, lined with sound-absorbing foam, completely light-proof and suspended on hydraulic dampeners to eliminate all vibration. The room was so silent that you could hear your own blood flowing, your own heartbeat, your own bones moving in their sockets. 6 patients volunteered for the experiment. They were promised early release if they could withstand 7 days in the silence room. Each patient was placed in an individual chamber, monitored by medical staff, and given minimal food and water through a sealed airlock. The first 2 days were unremarkable. The patients slept, adjusted, and seemed calm. Day 3 was when the journals started. Dr. Foster had provided each patient with a notebook and pen to document their experience. The entries from Day 3 all mentioned the same thing, a humming sound that seemed to come from inside the walls. But the monitoring equipment detected nothing. The rooms were completely silent. Day 4. The journals become frantic. All 6 patients, isolated from each other, write about the humming growing louder. They describe it as a voice,
then as multiple voices, then as a choir. One patient wrote, "They're singing the song that was playing when I was born. How do they know that? How can they know that?" Day 5. The monitoring staff became concerned. The patients had stopped eating. The cameras showed them sitting in the corners of their rooms, hands over their ears, rocking back and forth. But here's the impossible part. All 6 patients were rocking at exactly the same rhythm, perfectly synchronized, despite being in separate, sealed chambers. Day 6. The journals stop. But the cameras show all 6 patients standing in the center of their rooms, arms at their sides, facing the same direction. For 14 hours straight, they didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe noticeably, just stood, perfectly still, facing east. Dr. Foster made the decision to end the experiment early. On the morning of day 7, staff entered the chambers to extract the patients. 5 of the 6 chambers were empty. Not just empty, but pristine, as if no one had ever been inside. The cameras showed the patients standing there just minutes before, but now they were gone. No hidden exits, no possible escape route, just gone. The 6th chamber still contained its patient, a woman named Sarah Chen. She was sitting in the corner, writing in her journal with a pen that had long since run out of ink, carving words into the paper with the dry tip, the same sentence over and over and over again, covering every page, every surface, carved so deeply the paper had torn through in places. The silence is speaking, and it knows our names, and it's been waiting so long, and it's finally time to answer, and the silence is speaking, and it knows our names. Sarah was removed from the chamber and immediately sedated. When she woke up 3 days later, she had no memory of the experiment, but she would only speak in whispers for the rest of her life, claiming that if she spoke too loudly, they would hear her and come back. The 5 missing patients were never found. The official report stated they had escaped during a security lapse, but the cameras never stopped recording. The doors never opened. They simply vanished from sealed chambers, leaving behind only their journals and one final chilling detail. On the wall of each empty chamber, written in what analysis confirmed was human blood, was a single word in perfect handwriting: finally. The silence rooms were demolished. Dr. Foster's medical license was revoked. All records were sealed under national security protocols, which makes no sense for a psychiatric experiment unless something truly inexplicable occurred. But here's the final twist. In 2018, a Reddit user posted about their grandmother who had worked as a nurse at Northfield in 1979. The grandmother on her deathbed told the story of 6 patients who had volunteered for an experiment and disappeared. But she added one detail that was never in any official report. She said that for months after the experiment ended, staff would hear singing coming from the demolished site of the silence rooms. Not just any singing, but a choir of voices, perfectly harmonized, singing in a language no one could identify. And if you listened carefully, you could count the voices. There were always exactly 6.
These 3 stories were hidden for a reason. Blackwater Asylum, St. Agnes Hospital, and Northfield Institute all closed their doors within years of these incidents. The buildings were destroyed, the records were sealed, and the people who witnessed these events were either silenced or discredited. But the truth has a way of surfacing. It seeps through the cracks. It whispers from forgotten archives. It finds those who are willing to listen. Tonight, you listened, and now you know what time forgot. The question is, will you be able to forget it yourself? Or will these stories do what stories like this always do? Will they wait until exactly 2:47 a.m.?
Or when you're staring into a mirror a little too long? Or when the world goes just a little too quiet? Will they remind you that some places, some experiments, some silences were never meant to be disturbed? Sleep well, if you can.